Welcome to the Bowery Poetry Club. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Festival Neue Literatur, and especially to our event today. There's something about translation. My name is Brittany Hazelwood, and I'm the managing director of Festival Neue Literatur this year, and I'm so excited to see all of your faces. It's a beautiful day outside. I'm glad you guys all cuddled in here together in this tight space. We're glad to have you guys. We have such a power panel gathered here today, and I wouldn't dare keep you too long, so I just have a few comments. So let me get to those. Our panelists today represent 3 languages, German, Italian, and Spanish. But they also represent a window into the life cycle of literature and translation, from authorship to translation itself to editorial to literary criticism as well. The other events in this year's festival offer opportunities to engage with our 8 featured authors. However, this event was created to pay homage not only to the act and the art of literary translation, but to champion translators themselves, without whom our festival would be impossible. Translators have led our festival. These have included Susan Bernofsky, Tess Lewis, and this year's translator, Ross Benjamin. Maybe you can wave, Ross. And just as a note, in our early years of our festival, we only featured untranslated authors. That's changed over the years, but this would be a feat that would be impossible without a community of translators willing to dedicate their time, their creativity, and their craft to this festival. I would like to acknowledge this year's translators who have translated the selected authors. That includes Daniel Bowles, who translated Xaver Bayer, David Dolenmeyer, who translated Iris Hanukkah. Iris Hanukkah is there. Maybe you can wave, Iris. Xaver is also in the back as well. Sophie Duvernoy, who translated Sibylle Berg. Aaron Kerner, who translated Christopher Klöbler, who is right there in the front as well. Edna McGowan, who translated Fia Kaiser, who's also at the author's table. And Donald McLaughlin, who translated Pedro Lenz. So here in New York, I would dare say that literary translation has one of the most committed and fiercely passionate communities. It is a community comprised of translators, naturally, publishing folks, critics, authors, and adventurous readers, many of whom are gathered here today. Underlying this passion are certainly various rationales. However, I think we can all agree that there's something about translation. Lately, I've been thinking about translation from a legal perspective, which doesn't seem quite natural, but I'm a third-year law student, so it creeps into my literature reading. And when I was doing some literary research, some legal research, I stumbled across a case dealing with translation. It's an 1852 case dealing with Harriet Beecher Stowe and a German translation of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And so in the case, there was a holding about translation not infringing on the original work. That is not how it works, so don't adhere to that holding at all. But there's something that the judge said that was really interesting to me. Justice Robert Greer wrote, "Many can transfer from one language to another, but few can translate. To call the translations of an author's ideas and conceptions into another language a copy of his book would be an abuse of the terms." Now, it's not very often that I agree with judges on art, but this is one that I can certainly get behind. So now, before we get the show started, I have the great pleasure of introducing this year's 2016 Friedrich Ulfers Prize winner, who will share a few words with us all. I am so delighted that he could join us today, as he is certainly one of the most important and treasured translators of our time. That person, of course, is Burton Pike. Burton Pike is Professor Emeritus of Comparative Literature and German at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. He's also taught at the University of Hamburg, Cornell University, Queens, and Hunter Colleges of CUNY, and has been a visiting professor of German at Yale University, as well as department chair at Cornell, Queens College, and the CUNY Graduate Center. He has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Medaille für Verdienste Robert Musil from the city of Klagenfurt, Austria, and was a member of the executive committee of the Internationale Robert Musil Gesellschaft, and was also active in both the American and International Comparative Literature Associations. He is a member of the Penn Translation Committee. He has written extensively on Musil, has edited and co-translated Musil, The Man Without Qualities, and a book of Musil's essays, precision and soul, as well as editing a collection of Muziel's stories. He's also translated and written the introductions of Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther, Rilke's The Notebook of Malte Laura Brigge, and Gerhard Mayer's Isle of the Dead, which won the 2012 Helen and Kurt Wolf Prize for German. He has translated a story by Proust for Conjunctions, a story by Ingeborg Bachmann for Grand Street, and stories by Elisa Walser for Chicago Review and Painting in a Man's World. More of his translations of prose and poetry from German and French have appeared in Fiction, Grand Street, Conjunctions, and other magazines. Please help me in giving Burton Pike a very, very warm welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and also I feel myself intimidated by that introduction. But what I'm interested in about the session today is the idea that a translator always feels very isolated when you're translating. And you are very isolated when you're translating. But a translation also involves a great many other people and other things to do. And the other people, of course, are the editors, the publishers, and one has always, let me say, arguments in the good sense with them about the book and how to do this and how to do that, and about the things that your translations, and when the drafts come in and they go out again and they want to change whiches to that's and vice versa, and you don't want to because you say the author. It's not that the author you said that particular word, but in the sentence in which the which or the that occurs, it's very important that it be either which or that, but not both of them, not the other one. And the number of arguments that goes on when translators talk to their publishers and so forth and so on. But a lot more is involved with a translation than just translating the book. And it's very difficult, and it's in a way a very concealed thing because, of course, it's a sort of private back and forth. And every publisher has an editor who's assigned to the book who has different ideas about the book, and which may or may not coincide with the translator's ideas. So as in translating, you have to think also a lot about how this comes across. And one of the things people sort of think they would like to translate a book because they like the book very much, but the book might not have an audience. And the publisher wants to be sure that the book will have an audience, i.e. that they can sell the book if they pay for the translation and do the translation. So there are a lot of these things that come into play, and it's something that I hope we'll hear something about this afternoon, about how translation fits into this market kind of thing. And I don't mean to in any way cast aspersions on the market, because it's absolutely essential, necessary, and it usually works quite well. Sometimes not in the case of translators or a translation or so forth. So it's something that I think you want to keep in mind when you think about translation, that there's this other thing, and I hope we'll be hearing a lot about that today. Thank you.
Just really quickly to introduce our moderator for today, our rockstar moderator, Sal Robinson. Sal Robinson has been an editor for international literature at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt and Melville House. With Bill Martin, she runs a reading series focused on translation, the Bridge series. I encourage you all to go if you haven't been already. Yeah, that's it. Come on up.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you all for coming. And I'm delighted you told that story about Harriet Beecher Stowe, because I don't know if you know that another part of it was that Stowe wanted to choose her German translator, and the German publisher who published the book independently said, the person you've picked is a terrible translator. They'll never do the right thing. That just sort of illuminates some of the the struggles that happen when books get translated into other languages. So I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you all and to talk with these extraordinary translators and writers on the subject of humor in translation and a couple of other issues. I'm a person of few words and practical, and so I'm just going to get started. We're not going to do a lot of introductions, and I'll introduce them as they come up. But first, our first panelists are Álvaro Enrigue, Natasha Wimmer, and Laura Perciasepe. Just for some background for you all, Álvaro, Natasha, and Laura have recently worked together on the book Sudden Death, which was originally published in Spanish in 2013 and has just been released by Riverhead. Álvaro is the author, Natasha is the translator, and Laura is the editor. And it's an exhilarating, really wonderful book, and you all should go buy it right after this event, right over there. So translation forms a part of this book in a couple ways. There's a translator character, and the book also concerns the sort of the meeting of worlds that happens when Cortez went to Mexico. And I wondered if we could start with a short reading from the book so we get a sense of what we're dealing with.
Sure. Since we're talking about humor, we thought that we would read a part that is funny but also involves some tricky translation of neologisms and puns, and it's in the voice of Don Diego Juanitzin, who is an Aztec noble who is incorporated into Cortez's entourage after Cortez conquers the Aztec Empire, and he learns Spanish, but the Spanish that he learns is sort of his own creation, and then it was Álvaro's creation, then it became our joint creation, and then other people got involved in the creation. So it's a real meeting of worlds and minds. So I'll read it in English. Álvaro's going to read it in Spanish, and then I believe we also have German.
This works, yes. The idea is that the conquest of Mexico happened in 3 languages because no one spoke the same language. So the Spaniards would speak in Spanish, and that would be translated into Maya, and then it would be translated into Nahua, and then it would return. So it was one of the greatest misunderstandings in whole human history and changed our lives forever. So what we will do is read, it's a tiny little piece, but I will read it in Spanish. Then Natasha will read it in English, and then Daniel will help reading it in the German translation. The idea is that some of you speak 2 of the languages, some of you speak 1 of the language. I don't speak anything. But anyway, that you have a feeling of how it was, no? How things changed. I know well the translation of Natasha, but I don't have idea of what the German text will say. I don't have idea. So, should I begin in Spanish? No? ¿Me podrías? Don Diego Juanitzin is making a cape for the king of Spain. He's in Toledo in the court of Carlos I, and he's doing a cape with feathers for the emperor. And he's speaking with Cortés about getting some materials that are essential for him to produce the cape for the emperor. ¿Me podrías conseguir también unos honguitos? Honguitos, para ver cosas chulas cuando manga la carpa del rey. Se dice capa. Creí que capar era cortarle los huevos a alguien. ¿Los huevos? Huevos no, honguitos te estoy pidiendo. Aquí nos quemarían a los 2 si te descubren emborrachándote con hongos. No me los voy a emborrachar, ni que fuera pomada. En España no hay de eso. Ancina no va a quedar tan chula la carpa real.
Could you also find me some mushrooms? Mushrooms? To see mellifluous things while I'm worrying the king's drape. It's called a royal cape, a capon real. I thought that a capon was a bird with its burls cut off. Balls. Not balls. It's mushrooms I want. Here they would burn us both if they discovered you drunk on mushrooms. I'd hardly be dunked in them. It's not as if they're a pond. There are none in Spain. well then, the royal capone won't be as mellifluous.
Here comes Daniel.
So, from the German translation by Peter Kulzen. Könntest du mir ein paar Pilze besorgen, sagt er zu Cortés. Pilze? Damit ich solche scharfen Sachen sehe, wenn ich dem König seinen Umwurf mache. Umhang heißt das. Ich dachte, umhangen tut man nur Räuber. Nicht Räuber, Pilze, habe ich gesagt. Die schicken uns hier sofort auf den Scheiterhaufen, wenn sie merken, dass ich dir Pilze gebe, damit du dich berauschst. Ich berausche mir die Pilze nicht, die sind doch kein Schaumwein. In Spanien gibt es solche Pilze sowieso nicht. Dann wird dem König sein Umwurf nicht so scharf.
Was it good?
Was it good before?
Thank you for that. So I wanted to ask Natasha, I mean, the way this, in order for it to work, it has to be wrong in just the right way. What did you think when you hit that passage?
Well, I knew it would be the hardest part of the book to translate. And it is very tricky because it's wordplay, and it's based on puns, but also on rhyme. And it doesn't have any particular logic, I don't think. There's no... I'm a translator who looks for logic, but... So my first draft was not entirely successful. I had... the register I came up with was sort of nonsense English, and it sounded a little bit like a child speaking English. And Álvaro pointed out to me after he read it that the point of the way it sounds in Spanish is, or in other words, I had to remember that Don Diego is a nobleman, and his Spanish is bad only because he doesn't think it's worthy of him to bother to speak proper Spanish. But at the same time, he's using kind of fancy words because those are the kind of words that a nobleman would use. So I took it up a notch in formality or in fanciness. So the word mellifluous came into it. I think my original translation was awesome for chulas. I'm embarrassed to say. Balls and burls stayed. That was an original. So I was really happy with the burls and the balls because burls, of course, being the same shape as balls, but being a fancy and sort of obscure word. The Capón Real, I think that the Spanish left in may have been in an editorial edition. I don't remember that.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
Yeah.
But I feel like that section came in pretty formed to me, and I was like, oh, it's funny, let's leave it.
Oh, good.
I think that's what I remember
that's
thinking.
Great. So, that was sort of the consideration. There's another section that we didn't read that involves this elaborate pun about, in Spanish it's regalo and zagalo, because Don Diego is going to make a mitre for the Pope, and he has this whole exchange with Vasco de Quiroga, thank you, who is the envoy of the Spanish Empire, about this present that he wants to make for the Pope, and he calls it a zagalo, which means
A beautiful boy.
a beautiful
boy.
a beautiful boy,
yeah.
a young boy, a young shepherd, I think sometimes.
Yeah, a shepherd.
A shepherd boy.
But it's something that comes from lyric poetry.
Yes.
Of the 16th century. So a zagalo is a beautiful boy that gets in love with a beautiful girl in a river, and there are ships and everything. And he's convincing Vasco de Quiroga to give a beautiful boy to the Pope.
Yes, and Álvaro, as you can imagine, gives it lots of sexual overtones, and in fact, I think it's very. And at one point, there's a very direct, right? It became very graphic even. So I wanted to keep that, but at the same time, I wanted to get the rhyming zagalo and regalo. So I originally wanted to play around with the word catamite, which was just a disaster, which is a Greek young boy who was usually the companion of an older man. But then finally I settled on peasant and present, which with a bit of elaboration worked out decently.
I think it worked very
Yeah.
well. No?
Yeah,
I don't
it
know
does. It does. It's
the
funny.
editor
It's
should
funny.
say.
And I think it's like very evident what the joke is too. It's which I
Yeah,
think is good.
I think I added the word handsome peasant. So you got the sense that it wasn't just a peasant. It was he had
sexual
purposes.
gift.
Yes, he had purposes. So
Yeah. And then there's another one, Latchkey and Lackey, I think, too,
Right,
which
yeah.
is another, I think, wonderful sort of modernized version of. I don't know what the original joke was, but I love that
Oh, thanks.
interplay.
I wondered if we could talk about. This book is so funny, really. There's a character, Malinche. Malinche. No. Who is plays a very important role. She is a translator and interpreter between Mayan and Nahuatl, yeah. And there's some sort of morphing of translation that happens through her. What did you encounter her at some point in your research or?
Well, she's an important figure in Mexican culture. Malinchista is an adjective now that defines a person that helps the enemy. Someone that will work with the enemy and not with their people, because she was Hernán Cortés' translator, but I have the belief that she was an incredibly brilliant politician and that it was her who did Cortés, or who convinced Cortés of doing a series of very smart decisions that helped him to conquer Mexico City, not to conquer Tenochtitlan. But what I was thinking about in that process was exactly a subject about translation, because Mexico City being the first city conquered, the first huge city conquered by Europeans in the Americas, had a very peculiar process. And the city was kind of translated to European culture after the conquest. No? The novel happens in the very early period after the conquest, where there is still not clear what will happen with it. No? There was a couple of generations that didn't have anything clear because the Spanish army was so little, no? And it was no one's plan to conquer Mexico City. It was an act of subordination to conquer Mexico City. So they took many decisions as they were going over it, and those decisions somehow work, but were not the more smart ones, because it was not the group of more smart people who was taking them. No? So in the beginning, they thought that the capital should be in Tlaxcala. And the first bishop of Mexico was the one who said, no, we have to go to the home of the empire. No? We have to go to Mexico City. And Mexico City was destroyed. The siege of Mexico City was brutal. It was 3 years. The city was completely destroyed. And the Spaniards then did this very interesting thing that was Mexico City was a floating city, a city in the middle of the lake. So imagine that after 3 years of war, no, it was completely destroyed. And the Spaniards did the weirdest, like the most stubborn operation that somehow explains the Mexican soul until today. I'm speaking here like Carlos Fuentes. I'm being essentialist. It doesn't explain anything. It's just fun. The Spaniards had this completely crazy idea that was to translate the actual city. So with the stones of the house of Moctezuma, they made the palace of the Viceroy of Mexico, and with the stones of the main temple of Tenochtitlan, they did the cathedral. And they are still there, no? Thanks to archaeological efforts of our time. Now you can see the three stages together. That is something only this generation has seen. But anyway, the whole city was kind of translated to European. You know, the houses became European. You know, everything. There was this process that was obviously a process of mistranslation. You know, Mexico City is the mess cities because it was translated, not replanned or anything. No, it's a city, if you know Mexico City, that songs, for example, because he's in the lake. No, the lake is still down there. So the opera of Mexico City that is in downtown is made out of marble, all of it, like the New York Public Library. So it keeps sinking in the lake, and the dirt that goes down comes out in other parts of the city. No, so it was not a fortunate translation, but literature, Borges said, move through unfortunate translations, so it's fine.
Yeah. So Laura, when you came to consider or to think about sort of bringing this book into English, what were some of your concerns or things you had to think about? I mean, this book just has elements in it that weren't in the original Spanish edition.
Yeah, so now this is the part where I confess I actually don't read Spanish, so I bought this book without ever having read it. But I just heard so many amazing things, and of course Álvaro being in New York, and I had met him. So I think my concern was that I knew the book was really wild and really inventive and different, and that we convey that sense of just newness and fun in the translation, and luckily Natasha came on board. But I think, it was just, I wanted the book to come across as just a wonderful reading experience, something that was, really unique, but also extremely readable, which I think is what it's come out to be in the end.
Maybe I could add that although the themes are historical, the tone of it is very contemporary, and that was something that I really tried to bring out in the translation. I mean, it's often quite profane and extravagant linguistically, and just a lot of fun, and I wanted that too.
Yeah, and the new pieces, there are like I think 2 new chapters and 1 new section in this book that are not in the Spanish edition, or I think any of the other languages. I don't know if they use this.
No, they are only in English because it's the only other language I speak.
Yeah, so it was actually a really
speak.
wonderful collaboration, because at one point I think the Word document that we were working on all together to edit this book had there was more text, I think, in the sidebar than in the actual book, being like, I don't know what this is, and here's an explanation of 16th century tennis rules, and
That's a fantastic Borgesian image there. The commentary that's greater than the.
It was
really fun.
It was fantastic because we did the British edition at the same time. So
Yeah.
it was Laura and the British editor who knew a lot about tennis, luckily, because she discovered things that
she was very concerned about the scoring.
But she was right,
Which was good,
because she discovered that the American team, in which I elegantly include myself, even with Mr. Trump would not agree with it. But anyway, the American team was composed by people that doesn't know how to add. Because it seemed that we couldn't get the score of the game
We're
right.
editors. Math is not our.
It's not
forte.
our thing. No, it's not our thing.
Well, don't forget that the copy editors later weighed in too. There were at least 3 copy editors, if not more, maybe a couple proofreaders too.
Yeah.
And fact checkers, no? And then at the end there was the tennis fact checker, no? Which was really, really humiliating. I have never seen a tennis game, and I wrote a novel about a tennis game.
Yeah.
So it was, my ignorance was so clear there.
I kept trying to explain to them it's okay if it doesn't make sense, because that it's about history that is made up, and about fiction and fact kind of mixing together. So some of the things aren't going to be accurate, and that's going to be part of the puzzle. So I think it was a hard. I do not envy the copy editors on this book, but I think it was also so much fun for them, because there's just so much in the book to kind of delve into, and everybody I know who's read it has been like, oh, I read this book and then went to Wikipedia and went down a rabbit hole for 10 hours about Rome in the 16th century and Galileo and Caravaggio, and there's just so much richness of history in here. But as Natasha said, it does feel really modern, and there's so much that resonates in what's going on in the world today, Mr. Trump or not.
A book is a social object, as you were saying, and a living thing, more important. Now, I think that every translation should be different, if you can. Of course, now I cannot do anything about the German translation or the Turkish translation or whatever, but I think that if you can insulfate life and more social life to a book through the process of translation and edition, it will become a better book, no? Or at least it will be a book that is closer to the experience of reading it in the original language.
Brittany, I actually can't.
I realize you can't see the time.
Time. We're time. Okay. Well, thank you all very much. That was really, really wonderful.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.